Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the show. Hope you're having a great day. And looking forward to already some great questions in the chat. I've been looking at it, so I'll get to those in just a second. As always, if you can give me a thumbs up in the chat to make sure you can hear and see me, that would be great. And we will get rolling. There we go. Thanks, David. Okay, good. So I'm going to address a question, then I'll jump right into your questions. I did start a poll. I was just curious what your asset allocation is. I just sort of put out the poll based on your equity exposure. And then I've got another thing I want to talk about in terms of future videos. But before that, I got an email today from a viewer that apparently they have a retirement plan at work. It's not a 401k. It may be a 457, I think. And in any event, they have a retirement workplace plan, and the investing options aren't very good, which is to say they're basically expensive, actively managed funds, say 1%. And they wanted to know my take on, if you're in that situation, should you still contribute or not? What should you do? And my take on it is a couple of things. First of all, if you have an employer match, they're going to contribute some amount of money to your retirement based on what you contribute. To me, it's still very much worth it. I would do it. And once I left that job, I would transfer out, I would move my money either to my new job or roll it over to an IRA. But it's pretty hard for me to pass up free money from my employer. Now, if you don't have employer matches, then the first thing I would do is probably max out an IRA instead of my workplace retirement account. But if you were able to max that out and you still had more money you wanted to save for retirement, I think I generally probably would bite the bullet. I suppose in theory you could do some math, and I don't know if a fund could get so, well, it could. I suppose in theory it could get so expensive it wouldn't be worth the tax benefits you get in a retirement plan. But I kind of doubt that. I guess it also depends on exactly what you have. So, you may have a couple of good funds, and I would try to make those work, or some that maybe are less bad than the others. And so I would probably think, once I maxed out an IRA, I'd probably still go back to the workplace plan and then just be prepared to leave it when I left that job. But the other thing I would do, and I had to do this with one of my jobs, they had a great employer match. It was dollar for dollar, up to 6%. It was great, but they didn't have low cost index funds, and so I started a conversation with HR, and it took a couple of years, as I recall, but eventually they got low cost funds added to their plan, and I know other employees were having the same kind of discussions with HR that I was having. And so you can do something about it. I mean, at least you can make your voice heard, in a productive, constructive way. There was part of me that wanted to just call them up and say, "What are you thinking?" And these were really smart people too. Anyway, it took a little bit, but we finally got lower cost options. So that was good. But yeah, I kind of think, again, definitely get the employer match. If you don't have that, or once you get it, once you've contributed enough to max the employer match, I'd probably max out an IRA first. I might even max out an HSA first, but of course, if that's through your employer, it is a different plan. So you may have different investing options, and maybe you have good ones. I don't know, but that could be an option if you have a high deductible health insurance plan. But eventually, if I maxed all of that out, I probably would still return to the employer plan and just find the best of the bad options that I could. That would be my approach. But a great question, and one that I personally confronted. So let's take a look at the poll. It's interesting. 16% of you are 100% stocks. Wow. I'll let that run for a little bit longer. I want to just briefly talk about future videos and something I'm going to do, and then we'll get to your questions. So my videos now, they're either this live show every other week. I've started doing this 5-question Friday, which I like, and you guys seem to like, so I'll keep doing that. And then I'll do 1 or 2 videos a week usually that are, on just some topic, some pre-recorded video. And I've noticed lately they come in around 20 minutes. That's not by design. I don't think to myself, okay, I want this video to be whatever, 18 or 22 minutes long. I just start talking, and then when I'm done, I just stop talking. And that's how long the video is. Very scientific. But I think what I'm going to do is an experiment, and I have someone helping me, is take segments of this show, the live show, or segments of the 5-Question Friday show, and cut them out and publish them independently. So they'll be short videos. I'm going to publish one tomorrow that's like 3 minutes. And if for those of you that watch this whole show, from start to finish, that they may not be of interest to you, but I know a lot of people don't watch it from start to finish. Also, the shorter videos might attract new viewers. And I think we have a good message here that people need to hear. At least that's my view. So that's you're going to see some short. I guess the point is you're going to see some shorter videos, and I'll be curious what you think of them. They'll be a little different because we're just going to cut them out of an existing video. So I'm not going to add a beginning and add an end of some kind. You're not going to hear me say the best thing money can buy is financial freedom at the end of each of these videos, in part because that's just a hassle to have to add that to all of these, and it would just make them longer. And sort of the point of this is to keep them in shorter videos. I am also going to go back to YouTube Shorts, and I think we're going to try to publish them on TikTok, which that means I have to get an account anyway, and maybe Instagram and Facebook. The shorter, YouTube Shorts I think can be 2 minutes, and I have a shtick that I do. I haven't done a YouTube Short now in a couple of years, but I'm going to go back to that. So that's coming up, for better or worse. Of course, if you don't like that stuff, just ignore it. It's easy. Okay. So we came in still 16% have 100% stocks, but a lot of folks have what I would call more conservative portfolios. 15% of you are below 60%. I'm guessing probably in retirement or near retirement. And then between the 60 and 80%, it's pretty much neck and neck. A third of you. I guess that's about what I would expect. I would be greater than 60%. I would not be greater than 80. So I would be the third option. I can't vote. I can't cast a vote in my own poll, which I think is just wrong in the event. If I could vote, that would be my vote. That's where I am. No right or wrong, by the way. It's interesting. I'm reading a lot of books on risk and uncertainty because I'm working on a book that I'm going to publish, and it involves risk and uncertainty. And I'm reading one book, which I would show you, but it's over at my other desk, so I won't show it to you. Maybe I'll put it in the newsletter this upcoming week. And by the way, you should be able to subscribe to the newsletter with a link below this video. Noreen normally tells you all that. And if you want to ask a question, just put @RobBurger in the chat and then the question, and that way I can see it faster. But one of the things this book points out is that uncertainty is personal. So what I view as uncertain and risk and how it might affect me, it could be very different than how you view the very same thing, whatever it might be, an investment, an asset allocation, because one, our circumstances are different, let's assume, and two, we're different. Maybe I have some fears that you don't have, and you fear other things or that I don't, or you have a certain way of addressing uncertainty. Maybe you're very comfortable with uncertainty and I'm not, or vice versa. So it's an interesting thought, because when we think about investments like a mutual fund or an ETF, we often think in terms of volatility and the investments, what standard deviation, how much it fluctuates from year to year. And we say, okay, well, this investment's risky because it fluctuates a lot. Well, yeah, that's helpful, but it doesn't really answer the question, how will that risk affect you or me? And it can affect each of us in different ways, depending on a host of factors, which I just found interesting. I'm not sure if that'll end up in my book, but you think about retirement planning, it's just a nonstop attempt to address uncertainty, right? How long are we going to live? What's the market going to do? What's inflation going to do? How's my health going to hold up? How's my spouse going to do? Do we need long-term care? The list goes on and on. Okay, let's get to the good stuff, your questions. Enough blathering on. How long have I been at it? I've been talking for 10 minutes? It's an outrage. I'm upset about that. Okay, we'll end that poll. The first question, eventually, by the way, I'll be able to show you these on the screen, but as you know, I can't do that right away. That's okay. From O'Brien Tracy, what are your thoughts on the SCHD reconstitution? Do you think the increase in banks added is of concern? So SCHD is a Schwab dividend fund, and I can show it to you in Morningstar. We've looked at it many times. I own shares of this in mine and my wife's Roth accounts. Here's the fund in Morningstar. Very inexpensive, 6 basis points, and it focuses on dividend-paying U.S. stocks, which means it tilts towards value. We can look at it here. It's super value. Look at that. It's not even on the main tic-tac-toe board. It's like it's fallen off the board. It's a good thing they have this extra large board, or it'd just be in a white space. Anyway, they changed all reconstitution. They just changed the investments, right? And they do this every year. I was actually looking at on Reddit of some things that they do, or a discussion of this. I'll be honest. Before you guys asked me this question, I didn't even know that this happened. It's like, okay, to me, adding banks is, and I haven't looked at the details. I mean, I've read a little bit on Reddit. I'm not personally would not be concerned because they add more banks. How well it will do, I mean, time will tell, but I'm personally not concerned about it. I think they make these adjustments annually. I will say generally I prefer index funds. I mean, this one is, to my understanding, they use different, I guess mathematical valuation formulas. I think it's very objective in a sense, but it's not an index fund. So it's not my normal kind of investment, but my understanding is they do this change every year, and I'm fine with it. I'll dig into the details to understand it better and what their current changes are. I assume they've issued a release. Certainly, they have to disclose this, as they have. I just haven't dug into the details, and I will do that. Marcus says, for people that retire at age 70, assuming a 25-year retirement, do you think one could increase the safe withdrawal rate of more than 4%, maybe to 4.5%? So it's a great question. And when we talk about a safe withdrawal rate, let me put this in some context. When we talk about the safe withdrawal rate and we're thinking about the 4% rule in Bill Benken, he is assuming a certain type of withdrawal strategy, sometimes referred to as static withdrawal strategy, meaning the amount you're taking out from one year to the next doesn't change on an after inflation basis, which is just another way of saying you'll adjust the amount each year by the rate of inflation, but that's it. So if you take 4% out, you've got $1 million, that's 40 grand the first year. In year 2, forget the 4%. You use that to get the ball rolling in year 1, fine. And now throw the 4% out. It's no longer relevant for the rest of your days. You could live to be 200. 4% rule, the 4% is gone. Starting in year 2, you simply take whatever the amount that was generated from that 4% was in year 1, for 40,000 in our hypothetical, and increase it for inflation, or if there happens to be deflation, prices go down, which happens in the US from time to time, you would actually decrease the amount, but you just adjust it for inflation, okay? And so when we think about the 4% rule, the one thing we have to keep in mind is it was derived based on a long list of assumptions, right? Of course, one was that you want to adjust your spending every year by the rate of inflation. Another assumption was that you were only going to invest in US stocks and intermediate term treasury bonds, that your asset allocation and what he ended up determining would be somewhere between 50 and 75% in stocks, that you paid no investment fees. It ignored taxes. It assumed that you were going to test this withdrawal strategy based on historical data rather than something like what's called a Monte Carlo simulation. Importantly, it assumed that when you looked at the historical data, you wanted your money to last for 30 years, guaranteed. You didn't want to find any period of time. He went back to 1926, Bill Bengen did. Later, folks took it back to 1871. But when you looked at any 30-year period, it must survive 30 years. And so what he found was you could only go to 4%. If you went any higher than that, you would find a period of time when the withdrawal strategy failed. And it happened to be for those retiring in 1966. 1968 was not a great year to retire either. It wasn't the worst stock market period, right? The stock market lost about 90% from 1929 into middle of 1932, I think. But we had deflation at the same time, so that kind of actually helped to offset, at least to some extent, the impact of the stock market crash. In the 70s, we had a number of bad stock market years, 73, 74 come to mind, but we also had double-digit inflation all the way into the early 80s, and that's what really killed retirees. And you say, well, then why was 66 the bad year? Why wouldn't 73, that's when the market crashed, why wouldn't that be the bad year? And the answer is, well, if you retired before that, you got the entire bad decade of the 70s. And it took you had to get all the way to 1982 before things started looking up. If you retired in 73 or really 74, as bad a year as that was, you didn't have as long to go before before good times are here again. I hope that makes sense. I know that's a long sort of background answer, but just to put everything in context. So if you change your planned retirement, remember, Bill Bengen assumed 30 years. The idea was you retired 65, you die at 95. Okay. Reasonable assumption, but if you shorten it, you generally can take out more. Now, you could take out more for a lot of other reasons too, right? You could say, well, I don't need a 100% success rate. I'm okay with a 90% success rate. Well, you could take out a little more in year one. You could say, yeah, I want to adjust for inflation, but if it's a really bad year, or maybe look at it differently, I'll cap it. Yeah, I want to adjust for inflation, but I won't ever take an adjustment greater than 5%. So like a couple of years ago when it was 9%, I could have survived by just increasing my spending by 5. I'll forego the inflation adjustment. Well, you could take out a little bit more. And in fact, by the way, Bill Bengen's 1994 paper actually discusses that in that paper. Now, of course, that raises the question, though, all right, but what's the number? And that's tricky, particularly if you start changing the rules on how you're going to adjust your spending every year. I can tell you just in terms of the length of your retirement, you could look at the Trinity study. Just Google, Trinity study, 4% rule. It was published by 3 professors from Trinity University, I think in 1998. I have it on my website, I think. You think I should know? I should know that, right? Let's see if I have it on my website. I may not. No, I guess I don't. Anyway, you just Google Trinity study, and you'll find it. Now, the one thing you could do, you could look at FI Calc, which is this website's free. And you could say, okay, instead of 30 years, which is the default, you could say 25. And I don't know if you noticed this, but the success rate jumped up. Let me put it back to 30, 96.8, go to 25, jumps to 99.2. You could put in your asset allocation, whatever it might be, and your fees, by the way, if you have fees. And then you could put in your withdrawal amount. So this would be 45,000 if we were going to do a 4.5%. And it's still 96.1, which very healthy, I think, but you may disagree. You can look at the ending balances here, and maybe a better way to do it is to come down here and look at all these. We can expand it. It'll show you what years failed. So 73, here's a 73 that failed. That's interesting. So 73 wasn't good, but here's 69, 68, 66. Those were rough years. You know, it's interesting. 73 runs out of money. If you retired in 74, you've still got, at the end of 25 years, 1.2 million left. And if you retire at 75, it's 4.7. It kind of seems like a crapshoot, doesn't it? It's like, you know, I mean, how do we know? We don't know ahead of time. But you have to keep in mind that if you wait until 74, your balance is probably a lot lower too. So, you know, you might be able to withstand a higher initial spending rate, but it's going to be multiplied against a lower balance because stocks got crushed in 73, 74. Let's see if I can find a chart here real quick. Let's see here. Yeah, Macro Trends has it. Yeah. Here it is. So here's 73. They were down 17%. 74 was down almost 30%. Pretty rough year. Not the worst, but no fun. So, all right. Hopefully some of you are still with me. I know I kind of went down the rabbit hole on that, but I kind of think that sort of understanding the thinking behind these things helps. At least it helps me. I don't know. All right. What's next? P-Ware wants to know if there's any data on how buffer ETFs perform or would have performed over the last 25 years. Not that I am aware of. So a buffered ETF, think about, so one of the things, you know, we talk about uncertainty and the book I'm working on and how to deal with uncertainty in retirement. We really don't like the unknown. We really don't. And I get that. And so we're often, I will say that no matter what you do in terms of money, retirement, investing, to deal with that uncertainty, to protect yourself against that uncertainty, and there's a lot of things we can do, right? We can buy annuities. We can do a TIPS ladder. We could do a buffer ETF, which I'll talk about in a second. Everything comes at a cost. There's a cost for a TIPS ladder, right? You know, some would say, I'm guaranteed to get X% after inflation. And I would say, that's right. You're guaranteed a mediocre return over the next 30 years. That's what it is. It's a mediocre return. And it might be the absolute best thing for you, or at least for part of your portfolio. But the reason I say mediocre is because there's a downside, right? At the end of those 30 years, assuming you've created a TIPS ladder to cover a certain amount of fixed expenses, you're out of money at the end. At least that pot of money is gone. You've spent it all, right? Typically, most of the time, stocks and bonds and using the 4% rule or even the 5% rule, you end up 30 years with a truckload of money, but not always. And it's the but not always that's the catch. And that's why people do things like TIPS ladders. It's certainly a reasonable thing to do. So buffer ETFs, think about it this way. Imagine an investment that said, okay, we're going to invest in the S&P 500. And here's the deal. You will never earn less than 0%. So if the market drops by 30%, you won't lose anything. You'll get 0%. It's not exactly how they work, but more or less for our purposes. This is how they work. But you'll get up to 10% return. But if the return's more than 10%, we, the mutual fund or ETF company, we get anything over 10%. That's roughly how they work. And so as a result, as you might imagine, when the market's doing well, they're a bad deal, right? When the market's up 20%, you kind of wish you did own a buffer ETF. On the other hand, when it's down 20%, you're thrilled you own it. And at the end of the day, as we know, the market's up more than it's down, at least so far in history. And so most of the time, you're unhappy with a buffered ETF, except when you're not. And so, you know, it's one way to deal with risk, but I will look for studies. There's got to be some back testing done on buffer ETFs, but I'm just not aware of it. If anyone is and can drop a link in the chat, that'd be great. Kat says, ever since you shared the story of the Vanguard account holder that had someone trying to access their account, it's been top of mind. I added a YubiKey and deactivated voice activation. That's great. I do wonder how voice activation is going to survive AI. I don't know. What do I know? Jonathan, aka Vinyl, we haven't had many trolls lately. I think that religion guy got the message. I didn't know there was a religion guy on the show. Anyway, okay, I'm seeing if I can catch up and show you these questions online, but it doesn't look like I can. Soon, but I don't want to miss any questions. These are good questions. So Mike says, good article about Social Security in your newsletter. Again, he's referring to the newsletter that I send out every Sunday. My favorite part is the point that we shouldn't claim based on average life expectancy, but rather out to our plan age, like 95 or 100. So I would say in my view, is that it depends. So some folks will say, I kind of view Social Security as insurance against living to be 100. May not, it's unlikely to happen, just if we look at the odds, right? None of us are likely to live to be 100. But if we did, it'd be good to know I've got this income, it's adjusted for inflation. And I think that's a very sound way to think about Social Security. But some folks will say, I don't actually need insurance there. I'll be okay. I could live to be 100 and financially I'll be fine. I don't need to rely on Social Security. And so remember, what we do to deal with uncertainty always comes at a cost, right? So the cost of assuming you'll live to be 100 and claiming Social Security on that basis, let's assume that causes you to wait until you're 70, comes at a cost. Why? Because you're probably not going to live to be 100, right? And you might say, I know, Rob, but it's insurance. I get it. And it may be a smart move, but it comes at a cost because you're likely to die at 84. Or, it depends how old you are now. Let's assume you're 65. Women are going to, on average, live a little longer than us men, but whatever. You're probably not going to live into your 90s, but you might. And some people will say, I don't need to insure against that possibility. So I would rather do an analysis based on when I'm likely to die. And for that, you have open Social Security. That's kind of as I understand it, the approach of that tool, which was built by Mike Piper. He was on the show. Boy, it's probably been a while now. I guess last year sometime. It's just something to think about. It's I don't think there's a one right way. In my case, my current plan is to wait until I'm 70. And part of it is not so much because we couldn't manage if my wife and I both lived to be 100, but because if I die first, I want my wife to get as much from Social Security as possible, which she would, if she would get my benefit, because won't be as comfortable managing the investments as I am. And so I'm okay with that. Is it a perfect solution? Probably not, but that's the decision I've made, at least so far. I've got time to think about it. All right. I want to ask another poll question. So 2 weeks ago, at one point, we had almost 2,000 people watching. Remember, the market went down that day. And whenever the market really crashes, a lot more people tune in to the live show. And I get it. That's great. That's kind of one of the reasons we're here, right? But tariffs were sort of a big issue. And now tariffs are kind of like, yeah, they're still out there, but now he's delaying. Maybe we're not sure. So I want to ask a question, if I can get this thing to work. I'll say, have your views on tariffs changed in the last 2 weeks? You're more worried about them, you're less worried about them. I don't know. I'm just going to put yes or no. And feel free to discuss it in the chat. The thing that the reason I asked this question is that when news breaks, we tend to have at least I do, an immediate reaction, an immediate thought, an immediate concern, or whatever it might be. It's kind of like Daniel Kahneman. So I have the name right? Thinking Fast and Slow. I've got his book. Here we go. Hang on. This book. It's a great book. Let's see if I can, there we go. Kind of, it's kind of in focus. There it is. It's kind of thick. I read it a long time ago, but basically the summary of the book is we think in two different ways, sort of knee jerk, fast, quick, kind of like when I'm playing speed chess, which is why I lose a lot. And then we have a second way of thinking that's slow and deliberate and thoughtful. We analyze. They're both important. It's not that one is better than the other. Sometimes we need to think quick, right? Like when a car pulls out in front of us. We don't have time to sit there and analyze and think about it and wonder. But I think we often react to things that involve our money and investments in a certain way. And then when we have time to think about it, maybe our attitudes towards it change. Yeah, maybe not. So I asked the question. All right. This isn't a good question. Let me see if I can pull it up yet. Not sure. I think I can. Maybe. Here it is. Yeah. From Keith or Kevin. Keith. I'm 35 in August. Is 100% AVUV, and we'll look at that, a good idea in my Roth IRA, or more of a 50-50 split between S&P 500 and AVUV, or total market? I don't care about volatility. I like it. All other vehicles are S&P 500. Well, let's look up AVUV, which is an Avantis fund. So first of all, before we look at the fund, there's one piece of important information that's not included in this question. Anyone know what it is? Percentages. I don't know how much is in Keith's Roth IRA, not in terms of dollars, but in terms of what percentage of the overall portfolio. So when Keith says he puts 100% of AVUV, or he's asking, in a Roth IRA, I don't know what percentage of his overall portfolio that represents. It could represent 97% if most of his money's in Roth IRAs. Or it could be 3% if he has very little in Roth IRAs. That wouldn't matter, right? Anyway, here's the fund. It's an Avantis US small cap value. It's a 5-star fund, which is basically of no value. It basically just reflects its performance over the last few years. And the portfolio, we can look at it. It's small cap value. I mean, it's exactly what it should be. Much, much smaller, by the way, than many of the Vanguard small cap value funds. And I like this fund. I don't own it, but I like this fund. I've not done a deep dive on it, but from what I know, it's a pretty decent fund. In my opinion, it certainly would be a reasonable choice for Roth IRA. Whether I would put 100% of my Roth IRA in this, I would probably think in terms of what should my asset allocation be. At least my approach in the past was to allocate about 10% to small cap value. I don't do that today, not for any particular reason. It's more 10% towards small cap. But regardless, that would be my approach. I probably wouldn't put more than about 10% of my portfolio in small cap value. So I get a little extra potential growth, but I also don't tilt my portfolio too far away from the market. Again, I'm not saying that's best for Keith or that it's best for everyone else. It was sort of my approach. As I've gotten older, whether I've gotten wiser, that's another question. I've tended to bring my portfolio closer back into more or less a market portfolio, again, with some deviations, but I don't have more in REITs like I used to. I don't have more in emerging markets, but part of it is because I don't feel I need to take those risks. Not that they're huge risks in my view, when you're keeping it to maybe a 10% chunk of your portfolio, but that's how I think about it. A 100% stock portfolio is risky. So you've got to be prepared. Who knows what the future holds? We could lose all kinds of money. But I would say at a minimum, be ready for a 50% reduction. It'll happen. I don't know when. I don't know why. But it will definitely happen, and it could be worse. So, yeah. Probably not the feel-good answer of the year. But so Jonathan says, and I don't think I can show this to you, but that's okay. He says his portfolio is at an all-time high because of dividend stocks, that they work in a down market. And I'm curious if that's always true. Are dividend stocks, take a dividend like the Schwab fund we were looking at, does it always outperform in a down market? I don't know. Maybe it does. I don't know. I know my international investments are doing pretty good. At least they were. Let's look them up. So VXUS is year to date 8%, up 8%. There it is. You probably can't read it. 8.04% compared to the S&P 500, which still isn't horrible. It's off 1.72%. Let's see what Tesla's doing. Oh, it's only off 26.6%. Anyway. Okay. This person asked, what do you think about Fidelity personal retirement annuities? I've not studied them, so I just don't know. I don't know if it's a simple annuity, if it's an indexed annuity. Fidelity personal retirement annuity. My sleeve came unbuttoned. How embarrassing. Okay. Let's Google this. Fidelity, what's it called again? Fidelity personal retirement annuity. Tax deferred. Here it is. I just don't know enough about this, but I've got it opened on a tab, so I'll look at it after the show. Yeah. Okay. So PH wants to know my thoughts on a rising equity glide path during the first 5 to 10 years of retirement. So just so we're all on the same page, it's where you would actually one way to accomplish this is when you retire, you start with, you got to pick your starting allocation, but let's just say it's 40% stocks, 60% bonds. Pretty conservative portfolio, I think, even for a retiree. But what you could then do is, for the first 5 to 10 years, just spend down the bonds. You'll leave your stocks alone. You'll spend down your bonds. You'll take your withdrawals from bond funds. Now, by the way, depending on which account you wanted to draw from, because you're going to pick the accounts you take from, I think, based on taxes. So let's say you wanted to take from a Roth account and all you had in there were stock ETFs, and you say, wait a minute, I want to spend my bonds down. What do I do? Well, you can, assuming you've got, say, stock ETFs and bond ETFs, say in a traditional retirement account, you could pull out stocks from the Roth, right? And then just go into your traditional and sell the same amount of stock ETFs in that account and buy bonds with it, right? It's all fungible. If you've got the accounts set up well, you can do that. But in any event, however you end up accomplishing it, you spend down bonds for, again, 5 to 10 years. And then I guess after that, you then rebalance every year to stay with whatever asset allocation you ended up at or you were targeting. Maybe it's 60-40. And Michael Kitces and Wade Pfau have done a lot of research on this. It's a bit dated. I don't know if they've updated it recently. I think what happens is sometimes that works out well. Sometimes it doesn't. I don't think it's hard for me to imagine it being a disastrous approach. But Whether you'll look back 5 to 10 years later and say, okay, I got the best outcome, there's no way to know. There's just no way to know. But I don't think it's an unreasonable approach. Yeah, part of it just depends on what happens in the markets, what happens with bonds, what happens with stocks. So I personally don't think it's an unreasonable approach. You can actually model this. Let me show you this. Hang on. See if I can log in. I don't know if I can show you this or not. Maybe. You can model this well in Projection Lab. And so let me see if, yeah, I'm just looking to see if this is right. So this is Projection Lab, and in the settings for your plan, you can model what allocation you want to bonds, and it can change over time, right? We can, I've only got 2 points in here, but I can change it. I can say, I want a lot of bonds to begin with, and then I want to go down over time, and you could add more points here. I won't go into all that now, but you can model that sort of thing in Projection Lab. And if you, Projection Lab is an advertiser. I don't have anyone, by the way, sponsor any of my videos. It's just a hassle. But I do have some affiliates, and Projection Lab is one of them. On the other hand, I do have a discount code, which I put in the newsletter. I think it's rburger-10. You get, I think it's a 10% discount. But in any event, that's one way to model a glide path. I don't think you can do that really. I don't think you can do it that way in Bolden. Anyway, could be useful to some of you. So, and then you can run Monte Carlo simulations off of that. Okay. Lance, I like this. Lance is not a fan of shorts, won't be watching. Fair enough. I will, although I think mine are quite good. Of course, I wouldn't do them if I didn't think they were pretty good. I've gotten this question a lot from folks. Apparently, there's been some videos floating around YouTube that say that SCHD, that's the Schwab Dividend Fund we just looked at, is a good alternative for bond funds. I think there's a typo in the question, but I think that's what you're asking. And I think that's a mistake. I don't think SCHD is an alternative to bond funds. Its risk profile is just fundamentally different than a high grade, either treasury or total bond market fund. You can see it in, let's look at risk. And again, we're looking at standard deviation. This is of Schwab's SCHD. It's 15 over 15 and a half, right? Which gives you an idea of how much the price is going to fluctuate. If we go to B and D, now this is probably going to be higher than normal. I'm trying to think. I think their risk goes back 3 years. So it still covers part of 22, which was highly unusual. But its standard deviation is under 8, and I think that'll go lower. Oh, that's right. Well, this is 3 years. I forgot they've got this, so we can actually, let's see if it goes low. Watch, it'll go higher. No, it went lower. That's what I would have guessed. 10-year, yeah, it goes all the way down to 5. Let's go back to SCHD and see what it is. I don't even know how old this fund is. Maybe it goes down too. I don't know. 1568 at 3 years. Yeah, 17 at 5 years. How about 14 or just under 15 at 10? But that's a big difference. I just don't treat these as bond alternatives at all. I'm curious what VU is, which is an S&P 500 fund. So 10 years was just under 15 for SCHD. Yeah, see, this isn't much different. 1526, it's a little more volatile, but not a lot. So same with the 5-year mark. Anyway. Yeah, I really think I just don't think SCHD is a good alternative to bond funds at all. All right. Jonathan always has an interesting perspective. The amount of money is also important. My buddy with more than 100 million is 90% stocks. Well, if he's spending more than 4 million a year, he could run into trouble. That's a lot of money. That's a lot of zeros. Jeff wants to know how should retirement accounts be set up or handled when inherited to ensure a spouse does not have to pay more taxes than is necessary? Well, I'll try to answer that question, keeping in mind that I know nothing about taxes, but I'm also not sure if I fully understand it. The way we approach it is my wife is the beneficiary of my retirement accounts, and I'm the beneficiary of hers. Not sure this is exactly what you're asking, but I think it is. And as a spouse, if I were to die, my wife could take my retirement accounts and just fold them into hers and treat them like they were hers. If you inherit, say, an IRA from a non-spouse, in most circumstances, there are some exceptions like with children with disabilities and things, but in most circumstances, you've got to pull the money out. You've got to take distributions. And those rules have changed recently. I have a small inherited IRA from my stepmother that's, she passed away more than a decade ago. So it's before the rules changed. And I have to take a little bit out. Again, it's not a lot of money. So my annual required distribution is quite small, but it still has to come out every year. But it's over my lifetime. That can't be done anymore. But as a spouse, if a spouse inherits, they can treat it as their own. So I don't know, Jeff, if that was your exact question, but that's my best answer. You can get trusts involved. I'm not really sure. And a spouse could even decide to let the account go into a trust if you've got it set up a certain way. But I'm not sure that's the best idea for a lot of people. Anyway, this is an interesting question. What should be asset allocation of a high earner whose career, I think, will last only 5 years? So you say, well, that's kind of wild. Well, it could be a football player, right? An NFL player. I mean, you see how long Tom Brady played, but he ain't the norm, right? And so depending on the position you play, 5 years could be a godsend, really. Some of these players that take a beating for as long as they do, it's just incredible. And so to me, I kind of walk through the same set of questions, right? The first is when do you need the money? So if you're saying, well, as soon as the career's over, I'm going to start spending it down, then I would treat it no differently than someone who's 60 and going to retire at 65. I would also look at your age. Let's say it's a young football player, just to go with that example, and they're going to retire at 25 or whatever, 27. Hopefully they've got a long life to lead, and so you've got to factor in that you're going to need this money for a long period of time. So that's going to affect how much you pull out of these investments each year. I would want to know other sources of income. How much of this investment are you wanting to spend every year? Whether that's reasonable or not would be a big question. For someone that's young in their 20s or 30s, I wouldn't think much more than about 3%. You could argue for 3.5%. That's sort of what's called the perpetual withdrawal rate. You can Google that if you're not familiar with it. I would probably be a little too nervous to spend at that rate myself, at least at that young of an age. Again, How much is my spending is discretionary? I could pull back if I want to. I can cut back. Do I have other sources of income? So those, in some ways, the questions that I would be asking if I were in that situation aren't much different than we ask and answer all the time on this show. Probably the biggest difference would be, presumably this person is very, very young if their career was only lasted 5 years. And so you'd have to factor that in. I don't know that it would, I don't know that it would change my views on asset allocation. A big question would be how much of their money they're going to spend each year. That's probably really the most important question in some ways. I might generally want to err towards a 75-25 portfolio. That's my own preference. That's my preference in retirement. So, but there's a lot, it's a hard question to answer in a vacuum, but those would be some of the things that I would be thinking about with that question. Okay. Okay, so Phil wants to know, back to this SCD question, and so it's interesting now. Phil says it's not financial stocks. The other person said they increased their bank stocks. I haven't actually looked at specifically what they've done. I did hear that they did increase energy stocks, which one might argue is possibly a response to potential inflation. Commodities tend to do well. Real estate, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, how much would you hold in value dividend ETFs? So the first thing, when I think about these kind of questions, how much should you tilt your portfolio is really what you're asking. It just, in this case, it happens to be towards large cap value dividend, right? The first thing I say is there's no way for me to know over my investing time horizon if doing whatever percent we end up picking, let's say, will result in a better outcome, either higher returns or maybe just lower volatility. There's no way to know. We can look at history. That's great. In some cases, it's turned out to be a good thing. In some cases, not great. There's just no way to know. So ultimately, we do these things because we believe the portfolio matches our personality and our worldview. We believe in real estate, so we add 10% to REITs. We really think that's a good investment, and we want greater exposure. Or we agree with Paul Merriman, and we really want some small cap value. And if it's a strongly held conviction, the only thing I would say is try to come up with a portfolio you can stick with for the next 50 years. And that's going to include times when dividend value ETFs or value dividend ETFs don't do as well. We've just come through that period, not this year, but you look back the last decade, it's been growth that's won out. So you may have to go a decade or more and it not work out. Are you comfortable with that? For me, I was comfortable to a point. That's how I kind of arrived at my 10% allocation for small cap value back in the day. I personally wouldn't tilt my I would still want if we were looking at my overall portfolio, you can do this, by the way, if you use Morningstar's investment tracking service. I don't know if you can do this in Stock Rover, but in any event, when you look at, let's go to VTI, for example. We'll just use this as an example, which is a total U.S. stock market fund. And if we go to portfolio, and we see this is sort of, if you look at the whole market as a whole in the U.S., if you own, basically all the public companies on a cap adjusted basis, meaning based on how much they're worth, which is what most index funds do. If that were your portfolio, it would be this blue dot. Now, if you put some of your money in SCHD, it's going to pull this dot down and to the left a little bit, depending on, let me remove the comment, how much you put in SCHD. And if you put some money in QQQ, which is a tech stock, it's going to pull it to the right and probably up a little bit. And if you put small cap value, it's going to pull it down to the left a little bit, right? I generally still want my blue dot for my portfolio somewhere in the middle here. I don't want to tilt my portfolio so much that the blue dot ends up over here or way down here. I want it, somewhere in here. I don't mind tilting it some. I don't want to get crazy. That's my approach. And I think the older I get, the more I want it towards the middle. Again, that doesn't, I just don't need a fancy portfolio. Not that adding SCHD makes it a fancy portfolio, but I think you guys know what I mean. All right. Let's see here. I'm skipping through just looking for my name. So if you want to ask a question, put @RobBurger. That way I don't spend a lot of time reading your banter back and forth, although it's very entertaining. Well, so thoughts on contributing to a Roth versus traditional for income earners in high tax brackets. Post phase out for IRA, what is the actual post-retirement income needed for one to be better? Well, post-retirement income. The short answer is I don't have an answer for you in that context. I can't tell you X dollars and you should do one or the other. I think generally, if you're in the upper federal tax brackets, and particularly if you live in a high income tax state, I tend to think traditional is probably the most likely better option for most people. There's always going to be exceptions, I suppose. And in terms of post-retirement, that's where tools like Projection Lab and Bolden come in handy. They will help you model that. But it's going to depend. Do you have pension income? What's your Social Security benefits going to be? How much do you have in taxable income and taxable investments, and how much income, dividends, and interest will that produce every year? You've got to look at what happens when you hit the RMD age. Are you going to work at all during retirement? So there's all these factors. And all we can do is sort of do a best guess. Keep in mind also, if you're married, filing, a joint tax return, it's possible that you get divorced, or it's possible that a spouse dies and you don't remarry, or don't remarry right away. And so that's going to change your tax picture. So I used to think there was like an answer to this, and now I've come to believe there isn't an answer. There are certainly circumstances where the best decision is sort of obvious. You're at the bottom of the tax brackets now, but you expect your income to go up. You're at the top of the tax brackets, but in retirement, you expect it to go down. You've retired before you start taking Social Security, and you're years away from Medicare, and that'll be the perfect opportunity to do a bunch of Roth conversions. Makes sense. So those are all sort of factors to consider, but I don't know of a way to be able to just say, my post-retirement income will be X, and therefore I should do this or that. And I'm not sure how to know for sure and have confidence that you know what your post-retirement income is going to look like, or the tax situation, which is really the point, right? Tax rates could change. I mean, we could just, unfortunately, the number of factors that can affect the analysis they're quite significant. And at the end of the day, I think in most circumstances, all you can do is make a reasonable guess. That's my take on it. All right. I miss Noreen. I used to see her in the chat and nothing. She's with her daughter, which is important. She's visiting her daughter, I think, today. Let's see. Rick says that Wade Pfau did a backtest study on FIAs. I guess that's an annuity, which would be similar to buffered ETFs. I didn't know that. See if we can pull it up. I remember this study. Now, I actually have read this, I think. Here it is. I think this is what you're referring to. I remember, if this is the study I remember, he got a little heat for this because he was doing it for the Alliance for Lifetime Income. Now, that doesn't mean what's in here is incorrect, but I think that raised some questions. And I'm pretty sure I've read this, but I of course, don't remember it. But I will, I'll take a look at it again. If you just Google Wade Pfau FIA study, you'll find it if you're interested in it. So this is an interesting question. Have any fund managers confirmed they are using AI to manage assets? Does AI drive expense ratios towards zero? So one, I don't know the answer to the first question. I don't know if they have. I would seriously doubt that AI will affect expense ratios of actively managed funds, at least in the near term, because I have no doubt, I would be stunned if analysts at actively managed funds are not using AI. I would just, you know, I would almost view that as inexcusable. But they're using it, I would think, like, for example, for research and analysis, but not to replace the MBAs that work for them at this point. I just don't see that happening. I would be shocked if that's happened. And so in some ways, if anything, AI could actually increase expenses. I mean, in one theory, you could say, well, it'll help analysts work faster. Maybe. I'm not sure that's been the case with me because I use AI a lot. Again, primarily for, I use it as a Google replacement. So I'm reading a book and it uses a fancy word and I don't know what it means. I don't Google it anymore. I've got a hotkey, boom, ChatGPT pops up, a little window. I type the word in, hit enter, it tells me what it means. Or if there's a person, a historical figure, and I'm like, you know, who was John F. Kennedy? Now I know who he was, but you know, some historical person I don't know. I'm going to do that. And I do it for research, either for my books or sometimes for YouTube video where I'm like, you know, give me all the pros and cons. I haven't done this, but just as an example, give me all the pros and cons of Roth IRAs and when they're appropriate and not. And the point is just to see if I'm missing anything. Maybe I should cover a topic that I didn't think of. So I would be, and you can, the other thing you can do, by the way, and I suspect, I got to believe fund managers are doing this. I can even show you an example of this. Notebook LLM or Notebook LM is a tool that allows you to upload. You can create a folder. You can upload PDFs, YouTube videos, websites, text, and it will take all that in. It can give you summaries of each. You can create folders and you can upload multiple sources, you know, around some topic. I'll show you one. I've only got 2 sources in this one, but this, I called it the 4% rule. I've only got 2 sources. This was from long ago. I don't even remember what the sources are. So this first source, it will create a summary, right? And I can ask it questions. What was it? Oh, the death of the 4% rule. New market conditions and retirees require rethinking of retirement spending, whatever. So I can query Notebook LLM about those 2 sources or just one of them. I can even generate, let me do this for you. I don't know how well the sound will come through. You might not be able to hear it very well, But you can generate what I'll call a podcast about these whatever you've got linked here, right? Whatever papers you've got. How do I get back? Here we go. So I could customize it, and I could say, I don't know, tell me how these papers add to the literature related to the 4% rule, right? And I can generate it. Let's see if you guys can hear it. Takes a second. It could take a couple of minutes. So I'll go to the next question. We'll come back to that as soon as it's done. It will take a couple of minutes. But it's really cool if you haven't heard it. It sounds like we're in trouble. That's what it sounds like. It's like you think there's real people there. They're back there at Google now reading this stuff, and they're going to start a podcast in a minute. Okay. I see my mom is watching. Hi, Mom. New people here are like, your mom is still alive? Really? She just keeps hanging on. Oh, it's funny. Okay. Let's see here. Here's one from Andre. Yeah. Can you talk about the comparative benefits with tax considerations by using zero coupon treasuries? Well, when I think of zero coupon, I primarily think of T-bills, where, so the idea of a zero coupon. So coupon is just a fancy word for interest payments. And you say, well, if coupon is a fancy way of saying interest payments, why don't we say interest payments? Where did coupon come from? Well, when you're on college campuses, if you guys can remember back that far, and you have someone's advertising something and they have their phone number written on those little pieces of strips of paper at the bottom, and you tear it off. I'm showing my age here because I know that's probably not how it's done now, but you could tear off that little piece of paper. That's how bonds used to work. And you'd tear off one of those little coupons and you'd submit it to the issuer of the bond and you get your interest payments. They still call it coupon. But there are some bonds that don't pay any interest during the life of the bond. You get the interest effectively at the end when the bond matures. T-bills work this way. And as compared to that, a typical treasury bond is going to pay you interest. I don't know, there could be exceptions in the government bond market, U.S. government bond market, but it's every 6 months, as far as I know. And as I sit here and I think about it, I've always assumed that for zero coupon, by the way, one aspect of a zero coupon bond is that the duration and the maturity of the bond are the same because you get all your money back at the end. Duration for bonds that pay periodic interest is lower or shorter than the maturity because of the effect of those interest payments have on the average time it takes you to get all your money back. But for T-bills, I've just assumed that the taxes are triggered when the bond matures. I think that's correct. I could be wrong. Happened many times. But with a typical treasury that pays interest twice a year, it's going to be a taxable income, assuming it's in a taxable account, whenever the payments come in. That's my understanding. Okay, let's go back to this. I'm going to play it for you. There's nothing really to see. Well, I can show it to you, but there's no people that you'll see. So let's see if we can hear this. You ready?
All right. So, hey, everyone. If you're anything like a lot of people out there thinking about retirement or you're already in it, one of the big things you think about is how to handle all the savings you work so hard for. And of course, there's that even bigger question that goes right along with that. Just how much can you really afford to spend every year without having to worry about running out of money later on? It's like the big retirement riddle, isn't it?
It really is. And for a long time now, people have been relying on this rule of thumb, the famous 4% rule. I'm sure you've come.
I'll stop there. I hope you could hear it. I mean, it sounds about as lifelike. It sounds more lifelike than I do. And you can stop it and say, hang on, I forgot to mention something. Can you also look at this? And they'll pick it right up. Oh, sure, that, blah, 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 blah. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. All right. Joe wants to know if I have a recommended Roth IRA calculator. I mean, a calculator to determine whether a Roth makes sense versus traditional? Not off the top of my head. I thought, was it Schwab that had one, or maybe it was Vanguard? Yeah, Schwab has one. It looks like this. If you just Google Schwab Roth IRA calculator. But I've not used this extensively, so I'm not sure what I think of the output or how useful or helpful it is. But you could try it. Larry says, love the show. Watch it every week. Well, thank you, sir. All right. So I have a funny story. It was funny to me, and then I'll get back to your questions. I got an email today from one of you, a viewer, and they said, Rob, you play chess on chess.com, right? So to set the stage, there are a number of people that stream chess, like on Twitch and YouTube, where they'll play speed chess and on chess.com, and they have followers that watch them play, and I assume that they comment on the games, and some of it's instructional. They might go over the game when it's over and then go on to the next speed game. I mean, a speed game takes 5 minutes depending on the time controls, so they're quick. Now the person they're playing doesn't know that the opponent they're playing is streaming the game, right? Because these games, you get paired. Chess.com just pairs you. You say, I want to play a 3-minute speed game, and it starts going. I don't know how it picks, but eventually you get paired with someone, usually someone who's roughly as good as you are based on your rating. But you don't have any control over who chess.com pairs you with. So these streamers are playing people, and unless that person happens to be watching their stream, they have no idea that their game is being watched by, in some cases, thousands of people. Anyway, one of the popular streamers, the Botez sisters, I think that's right. I know of them, both very good chess players. Of course, I've never met them, and they do these streams. Well, anyway, this person emailed me and said, Rob, you were on their show. You played them, or I think it was Andrea Botez. You played her on one of her live streams. Is that you? Because my username is Dough Roller, which comes from the first personal finance website I started almost 20 years ago that doesn't exist anymore. And I think that was you. And of course, I didn't know. So I went and looked up the game. Sure enough, in fact, I'll show you the game. And I won, which is kind of nice. I'm not going to lie. Although I didn't play very well. I'm not sure how much that matters. Let's see here. And it occurred in December of last year. I remember the game. I mean, I couldn't play all the moves out by memory, but when I looked through it earlier today, her username is super secret 12345, which apparently is not very secret anymore. Now, in fairness, I looked up, so they show all the history. I played her in 2020 as well, and I lost. But I won't show you that game. So let's see. Yeah, this was the game right here. I guess I'm famous. Probably not really. I didn't play very well. These are all sort of known moves at this point, but she actually had a better game, I think, and then made a mistake there. And then that was a bad mistake. And then I actually made a mistake, not the best move. And that was the end of the game. She resigned because checkmate's coming. Nothing could be done about it. Anyway, fun story. I thought it was fun. Okay. So great question. I'm retired. Does it make sense to move 401k to traditional IRA? So I think of a couple of things here. First of all, if your 401k is at the work you retired from and you're 55, at 59 and a half, you can pull money out, penalty free, assuming it's a traditional IRA. But if you're at 55, you can pull money out of the 401k if it's at the workplace where you retired from, penalty free, and there's rules you've got to follow. So the first thing I would think of is that applicable to me? Maybe it's not. Maybe you're older than 59 and a half. Maybe it's a 401k from an old employer, not the one you retired from, but it's something to at least think about. And then I think about liability. In theory, you have arguably more protection from creditors with a workplace retirement account, retirement plan than an IRA. Again, that probably I wouldn't make my decision based on that, but some people might. Beyond that, what I like about a traditional IRA is that I can invest in whatever I want. I'm not limited to the investment options at my 401k. Now, again, you may have great investments at your 401k, so might not be an issue. And then the only other thing I would think about is, do I like the support I get? Do they answer the phone when I call? Do I like the website? Is it easy to use? Are there any limitations on how I can withdraw my money? There are with like the TSP, or so I'm told. So I think those would be pretty much most of I could be missing something, I'm sure, but that would be what I would be thinking about in answering that question. I suppose, I don't think if you're going to be doing backdoor Roth IRAs, but if you're retired and have no earned income, again, but something to think about, because if you move everything to a traditional IRA pre-tax, it's going to affect your ability to do a backdoor Roth IRA. This is a comment. Let's see here. From PH, spent most of my last 25 years enforcing, writing, interpreting tariffs. Wording and implications. They affect U.S. buyers plus honest companies. The fraudsters tend to make out bad for America. Okay. Well, I know that the McKinley tariffs didn't work out well for us. What was that, 1890? I think it led to some trouble in 1893. I know the tariffs of 1930 were a really bad idea. It took the problems of the Depression and the stock market crash and just, threw gasoline on the fire. The current stuff, I guess time will tell. I'm certainly not an expert in tariffs. Okay. Lance says, horrible answer, Rob. It could be. I don't know what question I answered that was horrible, but it wouldn't surprise me. I think this is true. They say if I'm not going to tilt my portfolio at all, at least in terms of stocks, I'd be 100% VT, which is just a total global stock index fund. I think that's probably right. So Bill wants to know if in small cap funds, as a company does well and gets bigger, does it eventually leave the fund? So I've not studied that, but I assume the answer is yes. I assume the answer is yes. But I've not actually looked at the flow of companies in and out of, say, a small cap index. So I can't actually speak from experience on that. Oh, look, someone's defending me. Horrible answer. Don't talk about my Roberto that way. See, this is when we need Noreen. I think things are starting to come loose in the chat. By the way, I am perfectly fine with you guys, hopefully in a nice way, disagreeing or telling me the answer I gave wasn't good. Look, I'm doing this on the fly. I got no notes, nothing. I got a tea that's now cold. Let's see here. Josh says, I started using a YubiKey also after learning about it from Karsten on your show. And I bought Semantic. I haven't started using them yet, but I will. In fact, I'll probably just do it tomorrow, get it done with. Well, this is a good question. What's the difference between VXUS and VTIAX? Not much. We'll look at it. Let's pull up VTIAX. So we looked at this one, I think maybe 2 weeks ago. So at VTIAX, Vanguard, Total International, A is for Admiral shares, X is for index. And if we look at it, I'll pull this up in a second. This is a mutual fund. The giveaway is that there's 5 letters in the ticker, which is typical for mutual funds. You can see the expense ratio is 9 basis points. And you'll see here it says also available as an ETF. You might not be able to read it, but trust me, that's what it says. We're going to click on it, and it will take us to VXUS, right? So and by the way, here it says it's also available in Admiral shares. So we can just click back and forth all day long. The ETF is a little less expensive. Of course, you're going to have a bid-ask spread, so there'll be some costs in buying and selling it, although it's probably about a penny a share, I'm guessing. But so there's some costs there, but it's 4 basis points less on the expense ratio. I'm pretty sure the composition is the same. Let's see here. It's got 8,580 companies, 8580. Admiral shares, 8580. Yeah, it's the same fund. I think the way it works, and I know some of you listening will know this better than I do, these are basically different shares of the same fund. Vanguard had a very unique way of dealing with ETFs and mutual funds that was actually patented. I think the patent is expired now from a tax perspective. And that's one of the reasons, by the way, if you own shares of VTIAX at Vanguard, you want to confirm this with them, but you should be able to convert them into shares of VXUS tax-free. Again, confirm that. Don't take anything I say about taxes as gospel. But I'm pretty sure you can do that. Why you would want to do that? Well, maybe if you were going to move them out of Vanguard, because there's going to be no fees for buying Vanguard ETFs if you want to move to Schwab or Fidelity. There's going to be a fee to buy more mutual funds. Okay. So Lance says, you make good short videos. I just prefer the normal videos. So part of my theory on shorts, so some of you might like them, I suppose. But this is true for both YouTube shorts, which are a very specific kind of video, and then regular videos that are just shorter that we've cut out of the live show or the 5 Question Friday. Part of the thinking there is to maybe reach people that haven't watched the show before. I mean, for regular viewers, it's great if you find them useful too. But that's my thinking. Do I have plans to do a video on the Yale endowment strategy? Let me just first make sure I haven't done one. I could certainly do one. Huh. Well, when I search Yale endowment strategy in YouTube, it brings up in this video of mine, brings it up in the middle for me. We're looking at Stock Rover for some reason. This video is 3 years old, so I don't know what I said. the video is about David Swinson, his portfolio, and he ran the Yale Endowment Fund, which is probably why the search pulled this up. I don't recall actually discussing this. Was when I was upstairs. Well, there's an ad. I don't actually recall.
And
once again, look how young I look. Oh my God, I can't look at this. Anyway, I don't think I discussed the Yale endowment strategy then. So yeah, I can add it to the list. It's pretty straightforward. It's basically a mix of a static withdrawal approach like Bill Bengen, 4% rule, where you adjust last year's amount by inflation, and just a percentage of the portfolio balance, which is effectively what you might think of like how an RMD is calculated. Of course, RMDs change based on your age. With the Yale endowment, it doesn't work that way. You just set a percentage, let's say 5%. So you may, it's a mix of those two. So you're adjusting your spending a bit by inflation, but not completely. And the amount you spend each year is also a function of your portfolio balance, but again, not completely. And you could use the portfolio balance at the end of last year. You could use a running average, the portfolio balance, the average portfolio balance of the last 3 years, to sort of smooth out any big changes one way or another. But yeah, that's the strategy in a nutshell, but I can certainly work on a video on that. All right, we're almost to our hour and a half. Here's an interesting question. Does taking Social Security earlier than 70 help to mitigate the sequence of returns risk? Well, I suppose it could, in the sense that it might allow you to spend less of your investments, right? So that without Social Security, let's just say you need to spend 5%. And then once you start taking Social Security, it drops to whatever, 3.5%. Of course, part of that will depend on exactly when you take Social Security, because that affects the amount. But I suppose it could. It could mitigate the effects of sequence of returns risk. It's an interesting question. I've not thought through that in depth. The flip side is that as you delay Social Security, when you start taking it, you get more. So delaying it a bit might help you in that regard. So that too could mitigate sequence of returns risk. Of course, not while you're waiting before you start taking it. That's the trick. I'll have to think more through that. It's an interesting question. Okay. All right, this will be the last question of the night. Let's see here. Let's pick a good one. By the way, we watched, we're watching Reacher. I think there's just one episode left. I want to watch The Pit. Does anyone, I've got a poll running. Have your views on tariffs changed? 13% say yes. 86% say no. I'll ask one more question. Should I watch The Pit? I don't know if it's The Pit. I think that's what it's called. If you're saying, Rob, I don't know what that is, well, then just don't vote. But apparently it's pretty good. Anyway. Yeah, we're watching Reacher. I still haven't finished Severance. Here's my question on The Pit. Like, it's supposed to be very realistic emergency room drama, right? Like, is it disgusting? That's what I'm a little worried about. When these shows, when the emergency room shows happen and you're watching and someone comes in and they've been impaled by something, I just can't take it. It's stressful. All right. All right, this will be the last question. I'm surprised, by the way, that so far only 65% think I should watch the pit. I've heard so many good things about it. Now it's down to 63. I was kind of expecting more. Now that's only 39 votes, so that tells me a lot of you don't watch it. Anyway, Rob Berger, how many years of income do you feel comfortable in your bond allocation? Well, I think about my bond allocation in terms of percentages, first of all, not in terms of years of expenses. But I do then look at the number and I ask, well, how many years could I survive on that amount? And if you think about a typical 60-40 portfolio, 60% stocks, 40% bonds, if you're spending roughly 4%, it's a big if, maybe you're not, you've got roughly 10 years, right? I feel comfortable with that. I would probably start to feel uncomfortable if it were less than that. But 10 years seems like a pretty good long time. You can certainly have a stock market that's flat for 10 years. Of course, well, anything can happen, right? But I mean, if we just look at history, we've certainly had a stock market, that was flat or even, I mean, if you look at the 30s, that was rough. Took a while to get back to where we were. But at 10 years, I feel reasonably comfortable. And in our case, it's more than that. And that makes me feel even more comfortable. Because we're not spending 4%. So that helps us. But I would think if I were much below 10, I would be concerned, although I don't ever see myself, it's hard for me to imagine ever having more than 50% bonds. That would probably be about as conservative as I would ever get. I don't think I'll get that conservative, but I would be concerned. But if I were on the edge and I needed all of this money and I'm spending 4% or 4.5%, it's really close, I would give serious thought to a 30-year tips ladder, at least for some amount of the money. If I were really, from whatever analysis I did, I thought, this is pretty scary. And if I hadn't retired yet, I'd probably work longer if I could. Or work part-time in retirement. I mean, to me, working in retirement is ideal if, one, you really enjoy the work, and two, you have a lot of freedom, scheduling freedom. I think that's ideal. I'm reading Christine Benz's new book, How to Retire. Let me pull it up. In fact, I just bought it the other day. Here it is. She's with Morningstar, and she interviews 20 people, and it's really done well. I actually talked to the publisher of this book about publishing my next book. I self-published my first. Anyway, in here, she talks with, it's one of the first interviews. Forward, by the way, is by Jonathan Clements of Humble Dollar. Let me see if I can find the, here we go. Yeah, Michael, I don't know, it's Finke, or I guess it's Finke. The very first chapter, I'm in chapter 3, I think, but this first chapter talks about retirement and what retirement will look like. A lot of folks might think that retirement's kind of like how you feel now when you're working and you get a 3-day weekend. You're excited, He's like, yeah, that's not really retirement. It's because it's every day it's it's always that way. And so a 3-day weekend is fun when you've been working hard, you need a break. But now if every single day of the rest of your life is like that, for a lot of people, that's not going to be fun. For some people it might be, but not everyone. And I'm definitely in that bucket. Anyway, good book. So far, I'm enjoying it. So I'll let you know what I think when I'm done. And in terms of the last question I asked you, wow, just 50%, 56% think I should watch it. That surprises me. Well, maybe it's not as good as I've been led to believe. I don't know. I see another question I have to answer. It says, clarify that you'd still rebalance every year, even if 10 years worth is in bonds. Yeah, I rebalance. I will rebalance when my asset allocation gets too far out of whack. Sometimes it doesn't, or I can deal with it through new contributions or how I reinvest dividends. So I don't always have to do what you might think of as rebalancing, where I go into this fund and sell X shares and buy Y shares of that fund. But I would every year if I needed to. Yeah. And because I have a target date retirement fund now in our traditional retirement accounts, that rebalances for me. So that's nice. Okay. Well, appreciate you all joining. Always grateful. Next time we'll have Noreen back, so it'll be a good show. And again, look for those shorter videos. I will be curious what you think about them. They will be different. You might like them, maybe not, but we're going to give it a try and see what people think. And hope you have a great week. And as always, until next time, remember, the best thing money can buy is financial freedom.